part of being is becoming, and you can only become if you start off as something limited. And I just thought about that, like, that's our story. You know, our story is our transformation. Hello everyone, welcome back to my series on Jordan Peterson's book 12 Rules for Life. And actually this is our last video because in this video we're talking about rule number 12, which is the last rule of the book. And rule number 12 goes, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. So what does that rule even mean? Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Basically, the premise, the context of that rule is that life is suffering. You know, Peterson often goes back to that premise throughout the book. Basically, life is suffering. So in the midst of that, we might as well take notice of the little things that bring us joy and wonder in the world that might make the suffering a little bit more manageable. And that includes petting a cat when you see one on the street, or whatever that might symbolize to you. That's basically what this rule means. And so in this chapter, Peterson gets really vulnerable about his own journey with his family in dealing with his daughter's diagnosis of her juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. It caused her a lot of physical pain, and it was really hard for them to manage, you know, even medically. Like, they couldn't find the right prescriptions for her to take that would actually benefit her and ease her suffering. So as a collective family, they just really had to walk through this very painful process with their daughter. And just through that process, Peterson came to understand one thing, and that is the tight interlocking between being and vulnerability. And just how limitations is part of our story. You know, if you think about Superman, and Peterson gives this example, Superman was created in 1938. And when his character was first created, he had the power to move cars and trains and ships, right? And as the years progressed, his powers just continued to grow. They just gave him more powers like laser eyes, and even he could move planets, you know, or create hurricanes with his breath. And he could even heal himself. But then they discovered people began to lose interest in Superman. Superman became invulnerable, and thus he became boring. He had no limitations, and so his story wasn't interesting anymore. And I really like how Peterson said this. He says, a Superman who can do anything turns out to be no hero at all. He's nothing specific, so he's nothing. He has nothing to strive against, so he can't be admirable. Wow. We admire people because we've seen that they've overcome, right? They had to strive against something. If life was just handed to someone on a platter, we don't really consider that admirable, right? That's why we love the underdog story. That's why we love someone who had so much to strive against but overcame. So back to Peterson's quote, he says, being of any reasonable sort appears to require limitation. Perhaps this is because being requires becoming. And to become is to become something more, or at least something different. And that is only possible for something limited. Wow. Part of being is becoming. And you can only become if you start off as something limited. You know, and I just thought about that, like, that's our story. You know, our story is our transformation, is our becoming something. And our limitations is what makes our story interesting. It's like the characters in our lives. If we don't have any limitations, then is that even living? Is that even being? Because you don't have room to grow. And of course, everyone has limitations. It's part of being human. So we can either accept that the limitations are part of our lives and strive against them and overcome, or we can be overcome by the limitations. And unfortunately, that is what happens sometimes when, you know, the trials and the crises of life feel like they're way too overwhelming. And Peterson also addresses that. You know, what happens if the limits required for being are just so extreme that it doesn't even seem worth being anymore? Because we do have to admit, a lot of history, a lot of life is unreasonable. You know, there is no good explanation. So as understandable as it is to give up on life, we do also have to realize that these sort of conclusions produce acts that only serve to make a bad situation worse. Peterson says, hating life, despising life, even for the genuine pain that life inflicts, merely serves to make life itself worse, unbearably worse. And people who have come to that kind of thinking are one step from total mayhem. So the answer isn't to hate life and despise life. And the answer is also not to try to find a good explanation for why bad things happen. Peterson says maybe thinking about it is not the solution. In such cases, in the depths, it's noticing, not thinking, that does the trick. Noticing. So this is when we come back to the title of this chapter, rule number 12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. It's that example of noticing those little things. That could be a nice break, a little extra light on a good day, or even a tiny respite on a bad day. Maybe you will see a little girl dancing, or you will enjoy yourself a good cup of coffee. Or maybe you'll watch an episode of your favorite TV show like Friends or Simpsons, which is Peterson's favorite go-to show. He says, and maybe when you are going for a walk and your head is spinning, a cat will show up, and if you pay attention to it, then you will get a reminder for just 15 seconds that the wonder of being might make up for the ineradicable suffering that accompanies it. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And that's how he ends the chapter. And I'm going to jump straight into my personal reflection on this chapter. I feel like in recent years, the self-care and self-love movement has gained a lot of traction, right? I don't really think that what Peterson is talking about here is that. I don't think that in the middle of crisis or catastrophe that necessarily getting a facial is going to help. But what is it really that invigorates us and encourages us to keep living and to keep pressing on? I think a lot of those things often don't even cost us any money. Like Peterson says, it's all about noticing and the wonder of being. And also even just the word wonder, right? We often associate with children, childlike wonder. What is it about wonder that reminds us so much of children? It's because children, it's like they're experiencing so many things for the first time, whereas adults are sort of jaded to a lot of things and we take it for granted. But when you see them through a child's eye, you are reminded of the beauty of it and the excitement of life. And that's what being like a child is. And also the verse in the Bible where Jesus said, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter into the kingdom of heaven. And that is a really strong statement. Unless you change and become like little children. It's not about being childish, but I think it is about being childlike, that childlike wonder. And also children are content with little, right? They don't need very much. They don't need thousands of likes and followers on Instagram. They don't need millions of dollars in their bank account. In a child's world, we're sort of reminded of what really matters. It's physical survival and comfort for sure, but it's also connection with the important people in our lives. That feeling of love and belonging and connection. That's all that really matters to a child. And also, children are very unguarded. They haven't experienced enough trauma yet or hurt and rejection in their lives. And I'm talking about the ideal child. And I think the challenge really is, how can we stay unoffended? How can we stay unguarded in life and still choose to notice the little things and appreciate the things that really matter and to be content with little things like that? Maybe the answer is to pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Yeah, so I hope that my summary and my reflections were inspiring to you in some way. I can't believe that it's over. I can't believe that we did all 12 rules together. Thanks for watching these videos, and if you missed any of them, you can find the link to the playlist in my description below. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on that notification bell. Again, thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!